Today we are just outside the village of Mametz, over here across the fields behind me, and we're here to talk about the story of a soldier who would become famous after the Great War. Sadly though, he was killed out here in these fields on the 1st of July 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, and as such he will never know how famous his story became after the Great War. We've talked about Charle May here on the channel before, and in fact we've been here by Mametz, we've been over to Danzig Alley Cemetery. We've also talked about Charle May's diaries, and we've read some of the little excerpts from it. Well, today we're here to look at Charle May's story in a bit more depth. Last time we were here we were talking about the 22nd Manchesters. Today we're here to find out more about the man himself, Captain Charle May. Charle Campbell May was born in New Zealand in 1889. His family moved to England in 1902. In 1912, he married a lady by the name of Bessie Maud Hull. They had a baby daughter, Maud Pauline May, in 1914. And in 1915, Charle May enlisted in the British Army after the outbreak of the Great War. Charle became a captain in the Manchester Regiment, and during the course of his service in the Great War, he carried with him a series of notebooks where he would record a diary. Now that was actually quite a serious offence at the time. To record details in paper with pen and paper of positions, activities, things like that was an offence. So Charle May did this in secret, but he carried a series of these notebooks, and more so than a diary, they were almost written as letters, almost love letters to his family, his wife and baby daughter, who were home in England waiting for him. On the 7th of November 1915, Charle wrote the first diary entry, and he wrote, "I'm going to commence this book this evening because now I've seen you for the last time before going abroad, and I will therefore be unable to make a personal confession to you again for some time to come. I arrived back here depressed from taking my leave with you and baby, and found little to ease the sadness of my soul." So as you can see, it was kind of almost written as letters to his wife Bessie and his baby daughter Maud. Well, since the war, Charle's diaries entries have been published into a book, and you can go and read all the diary beginning to end, and I urge you to. It really is a fascinating read. So I've actually bought a copy of the book out here to the battlefields. It is called To Fight Alongside Friends, and I really do recommend, if you're a Great War enthusiast and you want to find out more of some of the personal stories of the men who fought in the Great War, this is one of the good ones. There's plenty of good ones, by the way, but this is good. I'm going to put a link in the description below so you can go and get it for yourself if you would like to. There's plenty of excerpts of it online and stuff like that, but that's only such a small snippet. I really do recommend getting the actual book and having a read, because it really is fascinating. Charle arrived in France in November 1915, moving around a couple of different places near Albert, and then arriving here in Bray. Here is one of the places where he was billeted, and quite a lot of his diary entries reference Bray. Now, Bray wasn't entirely safe during 1916. There was still occasional artillery fire and things like that came down here. But Charle speaks fondly in his diary entries when he mentions Bray. Now, whilst I don't know exactly where Charle May was billeted, I imagine it would have been somewhere in a place like this. On the 31st of March, he wrote, "The garden runs down to the Somme, the which we can see gleaming from the mess room door, together with the trees on the further bank." And this is where the River Somme runs through Bray, just here behind the British front lines. In January 1916, he was granted leave to go back to see his family, to see Bessie and Maud. So after nearly 2 weeks away from France with his family, Charle returned here to Bray, and whilst he was billeted here on the 15th of February, he wrote his diary entry. Bray again, after 10 days of utter unalloyed happiness, 10 perfect days of leave with you, my own and our darling babe. I loved every moment of it. Charlie wrote that whilst he was here in Bray. He was rotating in and out of the front lines near Mametz, and that's where we're going to go next to carry on the video. Now, unknown to Charlie, he and his men were only a few weeks away from the big push, the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And the section of line that they were holding was out here in these fields behind us. So the British trenches run from Mansell Copse, which is over here on the hill behind us, where we've talked about the Devonshires and the Devonshire Cemetery, through these fields behind us, Mametz across the fields in this direction, and then over towards Montauban, where we've talked about the East Surreys, Billy Neville, for example. So this is where the Manchesters were. Roughly out here in these fields behind us is where the frontline trench was. In early June, when he was out here in the lines, Charlie witnessed something that I think was really going to start to give him a taste of what was laying out here across the other side of no man's land near Mametz. On the 2nd of June, overnight, Charlie May wrote in his diary again, "The stunt comes off tonight, and the team has left, cheered by the battalion and full of hope with our good wishes behind them." Charlie was referring to a trench raid that the men were taking towards a place called Bulgar Point. It was a strong German listening post that was out here in no man's land. So Bulgar Point was roughly kind of out here in the fields on the other side of the road out here. Charlie would have been in his frontline trench here, cheering on the men as they headed out on that trench raid towards Bulgar Point. The idea being would be to try to capture some prisoners, come back across to the British front line. The goal wouldn't have been to actually capture the trench, it would have been capture information, get some prisoners, maybe kill some Germans, and back over to the British lines. Now, unfortunately, the raid out here in no man's land towards the German trench didn't go as planned. And at 10 AM the next morning, on the 3rd of June, Charlie wrote again in his diary, "Street and Casino and 14 men missing, 2 prisoners. We could get no word though. It was horrid. The poor boys up there dying, and we were down here hopeless to do anything." Later that day, on the 3rd of June, Charlie wrote again in his diary, "We are in the line again, but it is a sad incoming. Poor Street and Casino and one other unidentified can be plainly seen tangled in a heap among the German wire, right under the parapet. It is evident now that Casino, hearing Street was in difficulties, went to help him and was killed in the attempt. It is one case of the supreme sacrifice. The boy did well. It is pitiful to see them laying there, but not possible for us to get to them. They are laying too close to the enemy." Second Lieutenant Joshua Casino and Edmund Street, the 2 men that Charlie May is talking about, who lay out here ahead of them in no man's land, their bodies were never recovered, and like so many, they have no known grave, and they're now named on the Thiepval Memorial to the missing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that those men still lay out here in this field. It could be that they were recovered to graves that were then lost, or it could be that the Germans recovered the bodies in the hope of getting some information. Maybe they buried them behind the German line. But one way or another, the bodies weren't recovered. And that's why they now, like so many others, are named on the Thiepval Memorial. As the first day of the Somme approached, Charlie and his men were based right here in these fields behind me. Their objective on the first day would be to tack towards this section of no man's land, up the slope on the far side there towards the village of Mametz. On the 17th of June, a couple of weeks before the first day of the Somme, Charlie May wrote in his diary again, "I must not allow myself to dwell on the personal. There is no room for it here. Also, it's demoralizing. But I do not want to die, not that I mind for myself. If it be that I am to go, I am ready, but the thought that I may never see you or our darling baby again turns my bowels to water. My darling, au revoir. It may be that you will only have to read these lines of one in passing interest. On the other hand, they may be my last message to you. If they are, know through all your life that I loved you and baby with all my heart and soul, and that you two sweet things were just all the world to me. I pray God that I may do my duty, whatever that may entail, for you would not have it otherwise. 5:30 a.m, 1st of July 1916, Charlie was in his frontline trench just out here behind me, and he wrote what was going to be his final diary entry. It was a glorious morning and now broad daylight. We go over in 2 hours' time. It seems a long time to wait, and I think whatever happens, we shall all be relieved once the line is launched. No Man's Land is a tangled desert. Unless one could see it, one cannot imagine what a terrible state of disorder it is in. Our gunnery has wrecked that and his front lines all right, but we do not yet seem to have stopped his machine guns. These are popping off all along our parapet as I write. I trust they will not claim too many of our lads before the day is over. At 7:30 a.m, the whistles went and Charlie May led his men over the top right here in these fields behind me, attacking towards Mametz. Their goal was to take the front line German trench, second line German trench, and ultimately into the Danzig Alley communication trench. That was going to be their final objective, here outside Mametz. Just moved around to the other side of what was no man's land. So we're now roughly where one of the German reserve lines was. Charlie May and his men attacked across this area out here ahead of us towards capturing the different German trenches, but ultimately the Danzig Alley communication trench. So out here ahead of us is where the Manchesters attacked from in this direction, across this patch of no man's land, capturing the German lines. The problem was the Manchesters were following a creeping artillery barrage, which was dropping artillery and then moving and dropping artillery, so the men could move up behind it. Now, whilst they were making good progress and having success, capturing their objectives was taking a little longer than planned, and that meant that they started to fall behind the artillery barrage. That in turn meant that the Germans were able to move up into their trenches, taking their defensive positions and firing back at the Manchesters as they advanced. Roughly where we are now is the position where the Danzig Alley German trench was, and in fact we have here the Danzig Alley military cemetery, named after the German trench location that used to sit in this place. Despite facing the machine gun fire and taking heavy casualties as the Manchesters moved forwards, they did manage to move forwards and capture the Danzig Alley trench out here behind me. However, in doing that, they suffered terrible casualties. Of the 820 men who left the trenches on the other side of no man's land here, 470 of them were going to end up dead, wounded, or missing. Now, the Danzig Alley communication trench ran along in this direction, and off it was kind of a spur called Bucket Trench, which ran out kind of roughly in the area where I am here. As the Manchesters moved up just near Bucket Trench, they were still coming under German artillery fire. Now, Charlie May's loyal batman, Private Arthur Bunting, had followed him on the attack that day, and he was with him as they moved into the German trench just here in front of me, and he described what happened when he was in a conversation with Charlie. He'd just given me a message to pass down the lines. I wasn't 3 yards from him, only I'd just turned the corner of the trench when I heard the shell burst, and Captain called to me. Charlie May had been killed by German artillery fire just out here in this area behind me. This is where Bucket Trench ran through, just next to the Danzig Alley trench. Arthur Bunting stayed with Charlie's body here in no man's land, just by the German trench. He was under fire for most of that time, but he stayed here with Charlie for 3 hours. After which he collected up Charlie's personal belongings, including his wedding ring and also the notebooks in which Charlie's diaries had been written. Now look, I think it's certainly important that he did. Had he not collected those notebooks and those diaries that day, then maybe we would never have heard the detail of Charlie's story. More importantly, I hope that being able to read those diaries in some way offered a level of comfort to Charlie's wife Bessie and his daughter Maud, who of course were never going to see him again. He wasn't going to return from the Great War like so many men here. But at least with Charlie, we get to hear his story, we get to read his diary, and we get to understand just some of what he went through here on the Western Front during the Great War. Now there's one more place that we need to visit before we can round off this video. So here we are at the grave of Charle Campbell May. Every time I come here, it's always a fairly well decorated grave with the flags, and people have left some pictures and stuff. And in fact, one of these flags is, I think, mine from a previous visit. But you know, his story is well known. But you know, sadly, Charlie will probably never know how his story became famous. I actually stood here today and read a couple of excerpts of his diary out loud by his grave, which was the first time I've done that. It felt quite surreal, actually. But look, thank you, Charlie, for giving us an incredible story that I've been able to turn into videos to share with other people. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, telling the proper story, the full story of Captain Charlie May when he attacked with the 22nd Manchesters here near Metz. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys on the next video.